kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and lavender dish soap the morning everything changed. I was 31, standing at the counter in our Nashville townhouse, still in my scrubs from an overnight shift at Vanderbilt, too tired to pour the coffee I'd already made twice. My name is Caroline Reeves. Well, it was Caroline Mercer back then, after 8 years of marriage to my husband Daniel. I had gone back to my maiden name by the time this story was over, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We had a good life. The kind that looked even better from the outside. Daniel ran the financial planning division at Meridian Wealth Group, the firm my father had spent 23 years building from nothing. My father had handed Daniel that position 6 years into our marriage, slowly, the way you ease someone into deep water, first the junior analyst role, then senior, then director. My father trusted him the way he trusted very few people. He trusted him the way I did. I was an ER nurse. I worked nights, I worked doubles, I came home at 6 in the morning smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion. Daniel would leave for the office before I woke up. We'd pass each other in the hallway sometimes, him freshly pressed in his Brooks Brothers shirts, me unraveling at the edges. We were not unhappy. That's the thing nobody tells you. You don't have to be unhappy to be living inside a lie. You just have to be busy. Our daughter Sophie was 7. She liked strawberry waffles and hated Tuesdays for no particular reason. She was the center of everything. Every decision ran through her without us even discussing it. Daniel coached her soccer team on Saturday mornings. I read to her every night I was home. We were good parents, even when we were mediocre spouses, and I think we both knew that and chose not to examine it too closely. That morning, the doorbell rang at 7:14. I know the exact time because I looked at the microwave clock when I heard it, irritated, thinking it was a package delivery. I opened the door in my scrubs with coffee breath and tangled hair. The woman standing on my porch was small and pale in a way that went beyond just being cold. She was maybe 65, wearing a winter coat that had been washed so many times, the navy had faded to a tired grey. She had one hand braced against the porch railing, steadying herself. Her breathing was audible, a shallow, laboured sound that I recognised immediately from work. I'd heard that kind of breathing in the ER enough times to know what it meant. "Are you Caroline Mercer?" she asked. I said yes, and something in my chest tightened before she said another word. It was the look on her face. Not hostile, not crazy, just weighted with something she'd been carrying for a very long time. "My name is Ruth," she said. "Ruth Calloway. I need 5 minutes. I know you don't know me. I know this is strange. But I need you to hear something before I don't have the chance to say it." I almost told her to come back later. I almost did. I was exhausted down to the marrow, and the last thing I wanted was a stranger on my porch at 7 in the morning. But her breeding scared me professionally before it scared me personally, and I stepped back and opened the door. She sat on the edge of the couch like someone who wasn't sure she had the right to be there. She declined water. She declined tea. She set a small brown envelope on her knee and pressed both hands over it, and she looked at me with eyes that had already made their peace with something. "I have stage 4 lung cancer," she said. It wasn't a plea for sympathy. It was just context. "My doctors said 6 weeks, maybe 8. That was 4 weeks ago." She paused to breathe. "I don't tell you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I tell you because you need to understand why I'm here. I have been sitting on something for 3 years and I cannot die holding it. I won't." I sat across from her. I didn't speak. "I have a daughter," she said. "Her name is Amber. She's 34. She's been in a relationship with a man for 7 years." She stopped, swallowed. "A married man. He told her from the beginning that his marriage was over in everything but paperwork, that he was waiting for the right time, for his daughter to be older, for work to settle down." Ruth looked at the envelope in her hands. "My daughter believed him, Mrs. Mercer. For 7 years she believed him. She had his child." My hands went cold. I heard myself say, "I'm sorry, what? A little girl?" Ruth said. "Her name is Lily." "No, Layla." She corrected herself gently. "Layla Grace. She's 4 years old. She knows her daddy's name. She asks for him." Ruth's voice wavered for the first time. "He comes on Wednesday evenings and every other Sunday. He leaves by 9. The room felt like it was listing to one side. Who? I said, and it wasn't even really a question because some part of me, some animal part buried under 8 years of normal Sunday mornings, already understood the shape of what she was about to say. Ruth opened the envelope. She took out a photograph and pasted it on the coffee table between us. It was Daniel. He was at some kind of birthday party. There were balloons, a toddler cake on the table, streamers in pink and gold. He was holding a little girl who had his jawline and a woman's curly dark hair. He was laughing. I mean really laughing, with his whole face open, the way he laughed at Sophie's soccer games, but almost never in our kitchen. Standing next to him was a woman, younger than me, beautiful in a low-key, comfortable way, and she was looking at him like he had hung every light in that room. I didn't say anything for a long time. I think Ruth understood that kind of silence. She didn't rush it. Why? I finally managed. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm dying, she said simply. And because when I go, Amber will fall apart. She's going to need help and he will not give it to her. He will disappear. Men like that always do when there's no one left to manage. She looked at me steadily. And because your father built that company, Mrs. Mercer, and I think you should know what's been happening inside it. She reached back into the envelope. What she put on the table next was not a photograph. It was a bank statement, Amber's name at the top, regular deposits, every month for 6 years. Not huge amounts, $2,000 here, $3,500 there, but consistent. The memo line said things like consulting retainer and project fee in once, almost insultingly, miscellaneous. He's been paying her rent, Ruth said. Her car, Layla's daycare. She paused. I asked her once where the money came from. She said he had a side consulting arrangement. She believed him. Where does it come from? I asked, though my voice didn't sound like mine. Ruth looked at me. I don't know for certain, but Amber once showed me a wire confirmation. The originating account name was Meridian. I stood up. I don't remember deciding to stand. My legs just did it. I want you to leave, I said. She didn't argue. She rose slowly, one hand on the armrest, but before she moved toward the door, she set something else on the table. A small USB drive in a grocery store zipper bag. I took photos of everything I could find, she said quietly. Over 2 years. Amber doesn't know. She would have destroyed it all. She looked at me one last time. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction, just a terrible, exhausted kindness. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mercer, I truly am. She let herself out. I stood in my living room with Sophie's school drawings on the refrigerator and Daniel's coffee mug still in the drying rack, and I did not move for a very long time. Then I called in sick to my next shift, went upstairs, sat on the bathroom floor, and I cried until I couldn't anymore. Just that once. I gave myself that morning, the floor, the ugly crying, the whole collapse. By noon I had washed my face and I had a plan. I did not call Daniel. I called my father's attorney first, Philip Hargrove, the man who had handled my father's affairs for 30 years, who had written the original partnership agreement when my father co-founded Meridian. I told him I needed a forensic accountant and I needed him to keep it between us. He asked no questions. That's what 30 years of trust buys you. Then I drove to my father's house. My father is a man who built something from nothing and who, in doing so, developed an almost physical intolerance for dishonesty. He's in his late 60s now, slower than he was, but sharp in the way that only age and hard experience make you sharp. I sat across from him at his kitchen table, and I put Ruth's photograph in front of him, and I told him everything. He didn't speak for a long time after I finished. Then he said, "How long have you suspected?" "I didn't," I said, "not once." He was quiet again. I watched something move across his face, grief maybe, or fury, or the specific pain of a man who had handed his life's work to someone and been betrayed by the gesture. Finally, he looked at me. "What do you need from me?" "Access to the Meridian accounts," I said. "All of them, without alerting anyone in the finance division." He nodded once and picked up his phone. The forensic accountant my father's attorney brought in was a woman named Doris, and Doris was the kind of person who spoke about financial fraud the way a surgeon speaks about a tumor, clinically, precisely, without flinching. She spent 4 days going through 6 years of Meridian's books, and when she sat down across from me in Philip's conference room, she had the look of someone who had found exactly what she expected and was still unhappy about it. The payments to Amber Calloway came from a vendor account, Doris said. A company called DG Advisory Services, LLC, registered in Tennessee. Single member LLC. She paused. The member is a holding entity. We traced it through 2 layers. It ultimately leads back to your husband. I nodded. He created DG Advisory 6 years ago, 4 months after Meridian gave him director-level signing authority. Doris opened a folder. He billed Meridian for services rendered, market analysis, third-party risk assessment, strategic consulting. The invoices looked legitimate at a glance. The work product, however, doesn't appear to exist in any internal file system. He was billing your family's company for work he never did, depositing the funds into a shell entity and using those funds to support a second household. How much? I asked. Doris set a single sheet in front of me. I looked at the total at the bottom. 6 years, just over $340,000. There's more, she said. In the last 18 months, the billing amounts increased significantly. We believe this was in preparation for something larger, a possible request for capital to fund a separate investment venture he was structuring. She looked at me carefully. He also made unauthorized modifications to 3 client portfolio allocations. The modifications were small enough to stay under the automatic compliance review threshold, but the aggregate effect over time would have funneled a significant commission overage to a secondary broker account we traced back to the same LLC. He wasn't just stealing from my family, he was stealing from my father's clients. I asked Doris to leave the room for a moment. When she did, I sat alone in Philip's conference room with the file in front of me, and I thought about Daniel at Sophie's last birthday party, how he had organized the whole thing, ordered the custom cake, hung the streamers himself. I thought about how proud I felt watching him. I thought about the fact that Layla Grace Calloway had her 4th birthday in a Nashville apartment funded by my family's clients. When Doris came back in, I said, "Tell me what we need to file the criminal complaint." She told me. I went home that night and I made dinner. Chicken and roasted sweet potatoes. Sophie's current favorite. I helped her with her spelling homework and listened to her tell me about a disagreement with her best friend at recess, and I kissed her forehead when I put her to bed. I was fully present for every second of it. I had made a decision somewhere between Philip's office and my daughter's bedside that I would not let the ruin Daniel had built touch Sophie's daily life one day earlier than necessary. When he came home later that evening, later than usual, Wednesday night, I now understood why. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop open, looking at nothing in particular. "Hey," he said, hanging up his coat. "You look tired. Did you sleep today?" "A little," I said. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter and talked about a difficult client meeting. I listened. I said the right things at the right moments. He kissed my cheek before going upstairs, and I sat very still until I heard the shower turn on. Then I went to his home office, opened his laptop. I knew the password. We had never felt the need for privacy from each other. That's how deep the lie went. And I found the folder. It was labeled D Consulting and nested 3 subfolders deep inside a folder called MISC Work Docs. Inside were the invoices, all of them. Perfectly formatted, professionally designed, not one of them corresponding to a single deliverable. I photographed every page with my phone. Then I closed the laptop, went back to the kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink. The morning I had chosen arrived 10 days later. Meridian's quarterly review was on a Thursday. Daniel always ran the finance presentation. It was his moment, the 1 hour in every quarter where the full leadership team sat around the table and watched him command the room. He loved that meeting. He had once told me early in our marriage that walking into a room where everyone respected your expertise was one of the best feelings he knew. I arrived at the office before him. My father was already there, and Philip and Doris and my father's HR director and 2 detectives from the Nashville Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit who sat quietly in the corner and did not introduce themselves to anyone. When Daniel walked in, same navy suit, same measured confidence, same slight smile at the sight of a full conference room. He saw me first and seemed momentarily confused, because I was never at these meetings. Then he saw Doris. Then he saw the detectives. I watched his face understand everything in approximately 4 seconds. "Caroline," he said. His voice had dropped. "What is this?" "Sit down, Daniel," I said. I don't know what you think. Sit down. I had not raised my voice. I didn't need to. I had learned something in the previous 10 days about the kind of authority that doesn't need volume. I pushed the folder across the table. 6 years of billing records from DG Advisory Services. The shell company you registered with yourself as the controlling member. The invoices you submitted to Meridian for work that does not exist. The client account modifications you made to generate undisclosed commissions. I paused. And the rent payments to Amber Calloway's apartment in East Nashville for the past 6 years. The colour left his face completely. Amber, my father said from the far end of the table, and his voice was something I had never heard from him before. Not anger, but a kind of grief that was also final. Daniel looked at my father and opened his mouth and closed it. The district attorney's office has been briefed, Philip said, his voice professionally level. As of this morning, your signatory authority over all Meridian accounts has been suspended pending the criminal investigation. You are being terminated for cause effective today. He slid a document in front of Daniel. This is your termination notice and a temporary restraining order preventing you from accessing any company systems or removing any company property. Daniel turned to me, not to Philip, not to my father, to me, Caroline. His voice cracked on my name. You don't understand all of it. I was going to tell you, I was trying to figure out how. I know about Layla, I said. The silence in that room was absolute. She's 4 years old, I said. She has your jaw, and you have been paying for her life with money you stole from this company and from my father's clients. I kept my voice even. I had practiced this part. You didn't just betray me, Daniel. You betrayed people who trusted their retirement savings to this firm. You betrayed my father, and you created a little girl who asks for her daddy every Wednesday night and every other Sunday, and none of this is her fault. He was crying by then. I hadn't expected that, actually. Daniel was not a man who cried easily, and seeing it destabilized me for just a moment, the way the familiar always does. There was still a version of me sitting in that room that had loved him, but it was smaller than the version of me that was done. The detective stood up. I didn't watch them lead him out. I looked at my father instead, who was looking at the table, his hands folded in front of him. When it was over and the room had emptied, he looked up at me. I should have seen it, he said. He was very careful, I said. My father nodded slowly. Then, what do you need? Time, I said. And company. I need to help you fix it. For 3 months, I worked more hours than I ever had in my life. I kept my nursing shifts because Sophie needed the routine. But every other hour I spent at Meridian, sitting with Doris and the new CFO my father brought in, going through the accounts line by line, writing letters to the affected clients, sitting across from people who had trusted this firm for decades and telling them the truth about what had happened and what we were doing to make it right. The story got out, the way these things always do in a city Nashville's size. The whispers were there at Sophie's school pickup and in the Trader Joe's parking lot, and I'm sure in the break rooms at Vanderbilt. I learned to let them be there. I couldn't control the whispers. I could only control what I was doing. The divorce moved quickly once it was clear there was nothing to contest. Daniel's attorney knew the evidence was overwhelming. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud, securities fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The sentencing came on a grey Tuesday in March. I wore a dark blazer and my mother's pearl earrings, not for him but for myself. Some private ceremony of closure. And I sat in the gallery with my father on one side and Philip on the other, while the judge handed down 4 years in federal prison and full restitution to Meridian and its clients. Daniel looked back at me once from the defense table, before they took him. I don't know what he was looking for. I gave him nothing to find. Sophie and I moved into a smaller house in Germantown, a real house, not a townhouse, with a porch and a backyard and a lemon tree that the previous owners had planted and left. Sophie claimed the lemon tree immediately with the total ownership of a child. She wanted to make lemonade. She wanted to sell it at the end of the driveway. She made approximately $11.50 over the course of that summer, and she was more proud of it than I have ever seen her. We were okay, more than okay, in ways I hadn't expected and couldn't have predicted. Ruth Calloway died 6 weeks after she came to my door. I found out from an obituary notice that Philip, who had tracked the situation quietly, passed along to me. She died at Vanderbilt as it happened. My hospital, my floor, a few months before. I might have passed her room. I'll never know. She had done a brutal and necessary and deeply loving thing in the last weeks of her life. She had been her granddaughter's only advocate in a situation where no one else was looking out for that child, and she had spent whatever goodwill she had left with her own daughter to do it. That cost her everything. I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. 6 weeks after Daniel's sentencing, I drove to East Nashville. I found Amber Calloway's address the way anyone finds anything now. It wasn't difficult. I didn't go to confront her. I want to be clear about that. I was 31 years old, with a daughter of my own and enough understanding of bad decisions to know that Amber Calloway had been lied to for 7 years, the same as I had, just differently in a way that left her with less. She lived in a second-floor apartment in a building that was fine but was not the Lincoln Park condo from the video I found myself identifying with. She was on the front steps when I pulled up, which I had not planned for. She recognized me immediately. I could see it in the way her body stiffened. I didn't get out of the car. I just rolled down the window. I said, "Your mother came to see me." She said nothing. Her face was every kind of complicated. "I don't blame you for any of this," I said, which was true. I had worked very hard to arrive at true. I blame him. He lied to both of us. She looked like she was trying to find words and failing. "Your daughter didn't cause this," I said, "and she shouldn't pay for it." I drove away. I didn't want a conversation. I didn't have one in me, but I had wanted her to know that what I was about to do had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with her mother, who had been courageous in a situation that asked nothing but silence from her and who had died for it. Through Philip's office, I established a small private educational trust, anonymous, funded from my personal settlement assets. It was structured to cover Layla Grace Calloway's educational expenses, from kindergarten to a 4-year college degree, tuition, supplies, whatever was required, dispersed directly to institutions and never in cash, never traceable to me. Philip asked me once if I was certain. I told him that Layla Grace was 4 years old and had done nothing wrong, and that her father had already taken enough from enough people, and that if I had the ability to make sure one small person came out of his wreckage without being crushed by it, then that was just what I was going to do. He wrote up the documents without another word. I am 34 now. Sophie is 10 and has recently decided she wants to be a veterinarian, specifically for large animals, specifically horses. I don't know where she got this, but I am fully on board. The lemon tree in the backyard had a very good year. My father retired last fall and handed Meridian to a board that includes me in an advisory capacity. The company recovered, slowly, carefully, with the kind of transparency that only comes after you've had the alternative. Doris still sends me a Christmas card every year. I think about Ruth Calloway more than I expect to. Not constantly, not with grief, but with a specific kind of gratitude that I don't quite have words for. She came to my door at 7 in the morning in a coat she'd had for 20 years, and she handed me a truth she could have just let die with her. She didn't have to do it. She had nothing to gain. Her daughter would never forgive her for it. She did it anyway. That is the thing I keep returning to. Not the fraud, not the courtroom, not the paperwork and the forensic accounting and the long nights at my father's office. All of that was just work. The thing that sits with me is that one woman, with weeks left to live, decided that the truth was worth more than her daughter's forgiveness, and she knocked on a stranger's door at dawn and delivered it. I can be angry at Daniel for the rest of my life if I choose to. Some days I still am, in the low-grade way that becomes less about him and more about the time, the years I spent trusting the wrong person. But the anger was never the point. The point was always Sophie watching me handle it. The point was always what I was teaching her about how a person behaves when they're blindsided by something enormous. I hope I showed her something worth learning. Some mornings, she comes into the kitchen before school, and I'm already at the counter with my coffee, and she wraps both arms around me from behind, and just stands there, half asleep, not saying anything. And I think, this is what was always real. This is what he didn't touch. He took 8 years and $340,000 and a version of myself I'll never get back. But he did not take this. I've thought a lot about what Ruth's visit actually cost her. Not in the abstract, sentimental way people talk about sacrifice. I mean in the concrete, daily way. She knew that telling me the truth meant her daughter would never speak to her again. She knew she wouldn't live long enough for Amber to cool down and come back around. She made that calculation in whatever quiet hours she had left, and she knocked on my door anyway. That's not luck. That's not fate working some invisible hand on the situation. That's just a person deciding under the worst possible circumstances to do the hard right thing instead of the easy wrong one. And the ripple from that single decision is why Layla Grace Calloway will go to college one day. It's why Sophie watched her mother walk through something that could have destroyed her and come out the other side still standing. It's why I know, in a way I never could have learned any other way, what I'm actually made of. Daniel made his choices a long time before any of this came apart. Every invoice he filed, every Wednesday evening he drove across town, every time he looked me in the eye and said work is crazy right now, those were all choices. And they compounded. That's the thing about sustained dishonesty, that people who haven't lived inside it don't quite understand. It doesn't just multiply the harm, it multiplies the person doing the harm. Daniel, in year 6 of those lies, was not the same man who made the first one. He had become someone capable of forging signatures, of stealing from people who had trusted him with their retirement accounts, of building a whole second life and maintaining both with the same hands that coached Sophie's soccer team. Each choice made the next one easier. That's not a mystery, that's just how it works. And what pulled it apart was the opposite of that. One woman who decided that whatever she had left 4 weeks, maybe 6, was worth spending on the truth. That's the thing I keep returning to when I think about Ruth. She didn't have power. She didn't have money or lawyers or forensic accountants. She had a brown envelope, a photograph, and a USB drive in a grocery store zipper bag, and she used what she had. I think about the person I was before that morning. Competent, busy, not unhappy, quietly not looking too closely at certain things. I don't say that as self-criticism. I say it because I recognize now that comfort can be its own kind of blindness. I was so practiced at managing the overnight shifts, the routines, Sophie's schedule, the marriage that ran on parallel tracks, that I'd confused functioning with thriving. I had made peace with a version of my life that wasn't entirely real. What Ruth gave me, at the cost of her daughter's forgiveness in the last weeks of her life, was clarity. Terrible clarity. The kind that burns everything down so you can finally see what the ground actually looks like. I rebuilt on that ground. Slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of help from my father and Philip and Doris and Sophie herself, who was 10 years old and more resilient than anyone gave her credit for. I didn't come out of this unchanged. I came out of it more honest. With myself. About what I need, about what I will and won't accept. About the difference between a life that looks right and a life that actually is. If you're in the middle of something like this, if there's something you've been not quite looking at, or if someone just handed you a truth you didn't ask for, I won't pretend it gets easy. It doesn't get easy. It gets clear. And clear, I've learned, is so much better than comfortable.